Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 3, The Queen's Justice Season 7, Episode 3, The Queen's Justice. Remind me not to cross Cersei. That might seem like an odd place to start for this week's Game of Thrones. The main attraction was the long-awaited meeting of Daenerys Targaryen, Sunbreaker of Storms, and so on, and Jon. This is Jon Snow. Their introduction proceeded along a suitably measured trajectory and avoided cheap tricks. Jon bonding with a dragon. Say, or Dany muttering, "There's something familiar about you," unless you count Jon pocketing his resurrection trump card. Maybe he figured zombie army warnings were enough tales from the crypt for one meeting. Season 7, Episode 3, The Queen's Justice. Remind me not to cross Cersei. That might seem like an odd place to start for this week's Game of Thrones. The main attraction was the long-awaited meeting of Daenerys Targaryen, Sunbreaker of Storms, and so on, and Jon. This is Jon Snow. Their introduction proceeded along a suitably measured trajectory and avoided cheap tricks. Jon bonding with a dragon. Say, or Dany muttering, "There's something familiar about you," unless you count Jon pocketing his resurrection trump card. Maybe he figured zombie army warnings were enough tales from the crypt for one meeting. And of course, she was the administrator of the cruel justice of the episode's title, as she had her revenge on Valyria's sand. "We figured nothing pleasant would come out of your own Greyjoy's pledge, made in the season premiere, to bring Cersei a priceless gift. He is a savage marauder, after all, and she a ruthless striker. Both claimed power through shocking acts of violence. What would be twisted and depraved enough to serve as a fitting engagement present for the story's most psychopathic pairing since Ramsay and Myranda hunted girls together? Turns out Euron's kidnapping last week of Valyria and her daughter Tyne was the demented pirate equivalent of a trip to Tiffany's. He presented his prize at the Red Keep, and then Cersei subjected Valyria to the same horror that she herself had suffered with the loss of Myrcella, fatally poisoning Tyne with a kiss. It was an eye for an eye with a twist. Valyria will now be made to spend the rest of her days rotting in a cell, alongside her daughter, who presumably will do so in more literal fashion. The punishment called back to Cersei's own dark terror, expressed last season after Myrcella's murder, about imagining dead loved ones decomposing in the grave. "You will watch her beautiful face collapse to bone," Cersei told Valyria. Which is to say that, like many punishments, it said more about the inflictor than the victim. It was a sign that even though Cersei once achieved ultimate power in spite of her enemies and oppressors, and to effectively solidified it through some savvy moves, she is still haunted by loss and fear and focused on settling old scores. At the same time, Jaime, her closest companion, seems ever more uncertain about the future, which could be a problem. It's a sign that, as I've said before, Cersei's venom probably won't succeed as a long-term strategy. Game of Thrones seems to be about the evolution from a bloody, top-down monarchy by force to a more democratic way forward as humanity bands together to confront the White Walker threat, standing in for catastrophic climate change or some other global crisis to be named later. The classic race to rule the Seven Kingdoms will eventually amount to a contest, to paraphrase Davos, to be the skeleton that sits on the Iron Throne. But for now, before this entrenched Game of Thrones gets flipped on its revenge-addled head, it's working out pretty well. Of course, it helps that the other side is floundering. Team Targaryen finally made the triumphant crossing of the Narrow Sea last season, and the Armada was something to behold. Hundreds of ships, manned by unsullied and Dothraki warriors. The Greyjoys, the Dornish Sands and House Tyrell along for the right, with air support from the first 3 dragons anyone has seen in centuries. It looked like an irresistible force, which is why the show has spent the time since putting its thumb on the narrative scale in the name of keeping things interesting. Now the Greyjoys are captive, or, in Theon's case, back in the pathetic zone, and their fleet is in tatters. The Dorne ladies have been decimated. House Tyrell has been conquered. The Unsullied are stuck the continent away from the action, and the aquaphobic Dothraki are stranded at Dragonstone. The dragons are still around, but Dany's advisors are urging her not to take the totally sensible-seeming step of using them to towards Euron's ships, because it would be too risky for her. When Tyrion explains it, it almost makes sense. "This place has changed," Davos said upon his return to Dragonstone. But has it, really? During Davos' stint there with Stannis, It was a gloomy place full of thwarted ambition and iron-thrown claims that echoed in the halls of the great castle to little effect. While there are fewer immolations these days, it's otherwise just as cheery as it was in the Stagnized era. On Sunday, East ended up offering John the dragon last rites he craved, but it didn't change the overall tenor of the place. She ruminated over her collapsing coalition. He was despondent, per usual. "We all enjoy what we're good at," Danny told him. "I don't," he responded. Even Tyrion was laid low by events, though he remained self-aware enough to know that he can't pull it off as well as others. "You look a lot better brooding than I do," he tells John. I'm pretty sure his response was a rueful approximation of a smile. "Too bad you can mind angst." A few thoughts while we enjoy the thorns. That was quite the sayonara from Lady Olenna, who left the show with a final kiss-off to Cersei that sowed even more doubt in Jaime about his sister-lover's future. "She'll be the end of you," she told him. "I'm traveling this week, so ended up watching the episode at a bar in Vancouver, and Olenna's vulgar indictment of Joffrey and spiteful confession, 'I want her to know it was me,' brought the most raucous cheers of the night. Diana will be missed." Bran finally returned to Winterfell and was reunited with Sansa, which would have felt like a bigger deal if Bran hadn't become such a drip since last season. "How have you been?" Sansa asked. "I am the three-eyed raven," her little brother responded. "I see everything at all times. I saw you in your wedding dress as the snow fell on one of the worst days of your life." Yeah," Sansa said. "I've got stuff to do." Little Littlefinger gave Sansa a few bullet points from his upcoming self-help hit, "How to outflank rivals and destroy people. Fight every battle everywhere, always. Everyone is your enemy. Everyone is your friend." It was his most authentic expression yet of his power-hungry worldview, and the latest sign that his Sansa-wooing campaign is sincere and won't be ending anytime soon. We'll see what Arya thinks about it, assuming she's still on her way to Winterfell. So all it takes to thrill the crowds in King's Landing is to lead a few women through the streets for them to spit on. A nice place. Somewhere in that scene was a message about demagogues and the fickle bloodlust of the plebeians, one reinforced by Jaime. "The same mob spat on my sister." But I didn't really buy it. In general, the show tends to use the King's Landing citizenry as a sort of dial-a-rabble shortcut whenever it wants to signal something about someone, whether it's Cersei's shame or Joffrey's unpopularity. Remember his season 2 dunk facial? Or Euron's emergence as a player? I was, however, satisfied to hear that state propaganda had supplied an explanation for Cersei's season September 6 explosion. "It was a tragic accident," she told the Iron Banker. "As commenters have noted, it was a pretty big plot detail to just have sitting there unexplained. I was surprised Cersei didn't blame her inside job act of terrorism on some external enemy, which is Tyranny 101. I believe we got the first confirmation on Sunday that the non-dragon dragons actually have names. They are called Viserys and Rhaegar, which I take to mean that one is a feckless chucklehead and the other is secretly Jon Snow's dad." Melisandre wasn't around to explain to Daenerys Jon Snow's Christ-like tendencies, because it would just be too awkward to face Davos. Which is narratively convenient, but also somewhat plausible. I was more intrigued by her latest prophecy, though Varys was understandably more concerned. "I have to die in this strange country," she told him. "Just like you." Samwell Tarly saved a man's life and was rewarded with more clerical duties, charged with making copies of rotting scrolls as Jorah rode off for uncertain Khaleesi-serving adventures. "Take heart, Sam, as Jon Snow, Arya and the Karate Kid learned before you, the road to heroism is paved with garbage chores." "The slave trade has entered a downturn," the Iron Banker lamented to Cersei. "Never fear, Mycroft, I hear it's making a comeback."